Hey there, I'm Chris Campion, and this video is my graduate project in Python for Data Science offered by Harvard University Extension School, and the project is titled Predicting the MLB Postseason. So this course was offered in the spring of 2018, and here is our teaching staff. So a little background. The purpose of this project is to estimate the teams that are going to make the playoffs in the major leagues of baseball, and ultimately which team is going to win the World Series. And the way that I do that is that I grab the past 5 years of MLB data, and I only select the first about 25 games or so, because that's about the point that we're at right now. And I take the first 25 games of each season, and then I match it up with whether or not they made the playoffs, and then whether or not they actually won the World Series. And the purpose is to take that data, train some models, and then apply that to our current year so that we can actually predict based off of historical performance on certain statistical figures which team do we predict for this year will actually make the playoffs, and then which team will ultimately win the World Series. So just to keep in mind that there are 162 regular season games in a season, and obviously I'm not using this to predict injuries or trades or those kinds of things. And with that said, this is only 15% of all of the games that are going to be played. The models that I use are decision tree, logistic regression, KNN, Gaussian naive Bayes, and my accuracies range from 58% to 71%. The libraries that I used, Pandas, NumPy, scikit-learn, and the data files that I have, you can find in my repository URL. And part of what made me want to do this project is that the Red Sox have gotten an incredible amount of good press at the beginning of the start of this year because they're off to the best start in franchise history. Starting 16-2, never been done before. So clearly they must be the favorites to win the whole thing, right? If a team starts out this well, they'll probably end very well as well. And I wanted to test that and see if that's actually true. The spoiler alert, they are not the team that I predict to win the World Series. So stay tuned to find out who actually is. And then jumping into the code starts out, as it always does, bringing in our data. I've got one data set for each year that I then aggregate into a master data frame. And you'll notice that this data is 161 columns wide. So the amount of data that we collect in the baseball arena is astounding. So there's so much that you could do. We'll talk about the factors that I picked and why I picked them, but just be aware there's an incredible amount of data. The one thing that I had to make off the bat was a win or loss indicator, and then I had to start subsetting my data. I need to start aggregating and picking only the fields that I need. So here's the first attempt at aggregating and then resetting that into a standard table. And now here's the creation of my factors. So again, I'm taking data from every single game of the past many years, and I'm grouping them into just one thin record for each team for each year throughout the first 25 games of the year. So it's a lot of work to get all the fields that I want, but this is how I get my hits for, hits against, runs scored, total outs, total walks, those things. And then I merge them all into a master staging table that you can see down here. So you'll have, So you have a year, a team, wins, losses, again, first 25 games or so, the runs they've scored, the runs again that they've let up, and all of these features that I think are very valuable. The one worth explaining is WHIP. That's something I didn't know. That's walks and hits per innings pitched. So basically how many people get on base. And if you've watched Moneyball recently, you know that wins are just an accumulation of runs. And how do you get runs? You get hits. So ultimately you could be walking a lot of people on base and walking them in and not having hits. So a very interesting and important factor that I included. Then I bring in the postseason results. So this is just each year, each team, whether or not they made the playoffs or if they won the World Series. And then I basically end up joining this to my training data. Now I can bring in my test data, which is just the current year. And it's the same, the same field, same feature. So wins, losses, runs for, against, WHIP, total extra base hits, batting average, etc. And now I can get in to start making my models. So for my decision tree, I split it into my training and test data. I have labeled my features and my target, and this is just for playoffs, right? So we want to estimate which teams are going to make the playoffs or not. And the decision tree comes out with about a 58% accuracy, not too great. Logistic regression, a bit better, 63%. KNN, pretty poor, 55% with an F1 score of 0.49. So that was sad. But luckily, Gaussian naive Bayes comes in and saves me a bit, giving me a higher accuracy of 71%. So that made me feel good. It made me feel that I can actually predict which teams are going to make it. And so I then take this model and I apply it to my testing data, and I get the following teams that actually made the playoffs, that I predict are going to make the playoffs, rather. So a lot of usual suspects, the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Astros, the Cleveland Indians, and a lot of teams that I had no idea were doing well, like the Diamondbacks or the Mariners. So very interesting. Worth noting here that I've got 12 teams, and only 10 teams are actually going to make the playoffs, but I'm okay with that because teams can tie and have a one-game playoff, and the winner of that will get into the playoffs, and I feel like that kind of counts. So I'm aware of that, of that issue. But I feel like we have a working concept, so now I want to apply this to our World Series. So I use the same Gaussian naive Bayes. We get high accuracies, almost too high, but I'm unable to actually make an accurate prediction of who will win the World Series. So I go back to the logistic regression, apply that to my World Series target, and wouldn't you know it, it predicts the Houston Astros will win the World Series, which is crazy to me. Not who I wanted, but I guess good for them. And looking through the data, just because it seemed a little too good to be true, they did have a lot of impressive stats. They had the lowest WHIP, they had the lowest ERA, they're second for hits against, they're third for hits for, and they have the lowest runs against. So clearly they've got great pitching. And as any cliche movie about sports will tell you, as defense wins championships. So if that's actually true, that makes sense as to why I'm predicting the Houston Astros to win. So here are my references on my data sets, and I would just like to say a quick thank you to the teaching staff. You guys were great. I really appreciate it and had a great year. Thank you so much.